Hey, everybody, it's the Plant-Based Business Hour. I'm Elysabeth Alfano. Thanks for being with me today. What is the state of grocery stores today in a post-COVID world? Well, there's no one better to talk about that than the former co-CEO of Whole Foods. I want to bring on my guest today, Walter Robb, who's here in studio, if you will, virtual studio. Hi, Walter. Thank you for being with me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
I want to tell everyone that you have a long history at Whole Foods. So you started in 1991, you moved to being a co-CEO in 2010, and then you transitioned out of that position in 2017, and we're still on the board, at least at that point. But now you are principal of Stonewall Robb Advisors, and also you are an executive in residence at S2G Ventures, where you are helping the next generation of sustainable and healthy food brands. I will say, note to self, it's so much better to be an executive in residence than an executive. So I'm now going to be my founder in residence at the plant-powered consulting agency that I have. I'm no longer a founder. I'm a founder in residence.
You go for it. You go for it. Yeah.
I love that. Okay, well, let's get right into it. The world obviously has been turned upside down with COVID. So tell me, how are grocery stores pivoting post-COVID? What are they going to do to continue to capture the increase of interest in plant-based brands?
Well, again, we're still in COVID, so it's hard to talk about post-COVID. We're not exactly sure what that's going to look like, but you're going to see, clearly we've seen that the customer has said they're going to, look, let me just put it this way. The move to plant-based foods is the biggest single trend in the history of food that I've seen in the 40 years. By the way, I started in 1978 with my first little store, so I've been doing this almost 40 years. This is the biggest mega trend akin to digitization that we see in the broader world in the food system, this move to plant-based foods. So it is going to be, by some accounts, a $500 billion market by 2040. You're talking about a trend that has big time airspace, legs, whatever expression you want to use. So the question is, the customer is shifting in a way that we haven't seen ever before. And so the grocery stores exist to serve those customers, right? And so in order to serve them, whatever role is in the grocery ecosystem, whatever position you occupy, whoever your customers are, it's very clear that the customers, and particularly the new generations of customers, want the selection of products. And so you have this tremendous evolution of product mix, capital coming into the market to support these companies producing new products. And then just good old-fashioned appreciation for Whole Foods with a small W, and plant-based foods, and just the richness and the wonder of basic whole foods. So this is all happening in a way that is profound. And the COVID, I think, the role that the COVID played was to accelerate our ability to see these things, to see the lack of resiliency in the supply, to see the split between food service and grocery stores, to see the safety concerns that surfaced around workers and customers, to see the brand affiliation that people had, many things that we saw as a result of the COVID. But essentially, it's accelerated, on balance, it's accelerated the adoption of multiple channels for the customer. So direct to consumer, digital channels, hybrids, stores that are going to operate both digitally and physically, and everything in between. And so the stores of the future are going to serve the customer in all those different ways. Compared to, even 10 years ago, where it was primarily through a visit to the physical store.
Yes, I'm going to push on that a little bit, because if we can get to specifics, I would love it. I couldn't agree with everything more that you're saying. It's been wonderful to see this education of the consumer take their health into their own hands during COVID and start putting 2 to 2 together to be healthier, and also workers, and just the source of their food, where it's coming from during COVID. But I'm wondering a couple things like this. Will the vegan section come out of the closet? Because it's been, stuffed there in the back. Will we see things like a plant-based deli? And at some point, Whole Foods used to have a 1 through 5 numbered system of the humane supply chain for animals. That went away. I'm wondering if anything like that will come back, or are we skipping that step altogether? So a couple specifics there.
Yeah, that's a lot of questions in there. But first of all, to be clear, is that in this COVID, customers didn't, many customers reverted to brands that they knew, like Spam and other things like that. So, the customer was concerned about their convenience, they were concerned about their safety, and they were concerned about their security, which in many cases led them to choose brands that they had known, that their parents had known, that they'd known for many years. So we don't have one customer out there acting in a unified fashion. We have many customers acting in many different ways. But broadly speaking, this trend towards plant-based foods is going to continue because it sits above everything or sits below everything as the world is realizing that food touches every aspect of our life, our climate, our community, our own health, the health of our community, the health of our coworkers. And so as people realize that, and it's being driven by not vegans and vegetarians, but it's being driven by flexitarians who are saying, I need to have more of these choices in my life. So will the vegan section come forward? The vegan section continues to grow robustly, but it's going to grow alongside this. What's going to grow is the suite of choices that are available to customers from multiple directions, and to give people an opportunity to make a plant-based life choices are going to be increasingly easy, both on the product side and the education side.
I love that you say that.
I didn't answer all your questions, but
no, but you answered a big one, which is the vegan section is going to continue to grow and maybe come out of the back corner near the bathroom.
It's a word that kind of stops some people, and it isn't as inviting a word as plant-based. For some reason, the plant-based resonates with people as being less judgmental or less restrictive, or it feels like more a relatable term for people that they can do that, versus vegan sounds like something that's very hard and the way they understand it. So again, for people who understand the power of food to heal or have ethical reasons for making that choice, that's a whole different customer group. But for the broader set of customers who are saying, I want to move, as you said, to take more control of my health. I want to explore this connection between food and health. I want to now explore the science that's showing adopting a plant-based diet is going to help me to optimize my health. Then that whole set of customers, I think they relate to the plant-based. And so how is it going to, how will it show up in the grocery store? It's going to show up in this much broader selection of plant-based alternatives. And I think that language will be much more common. Vegan is on there. It's certainly part of it, but I'm not sure it captures the whole gestalt of what's happening out there right now.
Or the whole market. Yes, I completely agree with you. But you bring up a really important point, communication and how these foods are communicated to the end consumer, who ultimately is driving demand, but they also need to understand it. So in the past, you've lived through, as you say, decades of food trends now. In the past, some communication for food trends has gone very well and some has gone poorly. I think of the GMO conversation, which not all GMOs are nefarious. It really depends on what you do with that, but they've lost that control of that conversation. It's very hard to get it to be understood by the consumer that GMO could be possibly a good thing for you. So as we have this term plant-based, which originally started as a friend to the word vegan, it was really meant to be no animal products. Now plant-based in some cases means just lots of plants along with your meat in a hybrid product from Tyson, or it could mean that. So I wonder if you have any comments, having lived through decades of communications gone well and gone poorly, about how this word plant-based is going to develop in the minds of consumers.
Well, if we know anything, we know that it'll be kind of, it won't be a straight line. It will be an evolution, maybe a circle and a step back and 2 steps forward and so forth. There'll have to be a couple leaders out there who are like a Whole Foods or somebody who's willing to step out there and put a stake in the ground. But I think that having these larger companies get involved in some of these things is not necessarily a bad thing in terms of bringing resource dollars and scale and visibility to some of these ideas. However, I do think that the call it 2.0, if you will, food 2.0, is going to involve some basic things. One is transparency, and we're going to define what that means in terms of exactly how something's produced. And there's going to be some specifics around that. I think customers are going to ask for that, expect that, and I think leading companies will produce that and show that they're versus 1.0, where that wasn't so visible. The transparency will be a characteristic of a brand and a product. I've been watching this site called hivebrands.com. I don't know if you know that website, but they've actually made it possible for the customers to buy their carbon footprint. So that every you check out, you get your carbon footprint of your choices. So this linkage between your choices and your impact is sort of there, right? So second thing is going to be accountability and responsibility. There's, I think, broadly speaking, in 1.0, there was sort of duck your head, pretend it doesn't exist, or deny. And I think in this generation, there's going to be, no, we're going to lean into our responsibility to participate in creating a more sustainable world and more sustainable health. And companies that do that will be rewarded with customers' support. Customers that do not, they won't be. It'll be hard for them to grow share because increasingly the new generations of customers come to expect that from people they do business with. So I think that. And third is this thing you mentioned about education, that I think there'll be new platforms and ability for this information to get to customers in a more rapid way. You're not going to go sit in a room and wait for a class. This information is going to be available on demand, accompanying the product perhaps, or accompanying your retail experience in the digital aspect of the app or something. So the responsibility and the opportunity to bring information along with the product as part of what you're offering, I think will set apart this next generation of companies who will be successful in creating 2.0. So those characteristics, I think, will define the winners in that. And it will be a wide swath of companies. It's not going to be just small ones. It'll be small ones and large ones. But if they, even if we found at Whole Foods, we got criticized a lot in the later years because we were a big company, right? But big can have impact. Big can have scale. Big something can happen. So it's really not about the size so much as it's about the principles or the guide rails or the guidelines that you're using to come to market and the integrity with which you practice those. So I believe those things will define 2.0. And plant-based, you're right. I mean, I follow a Whole Foods plant-based diet. That's what works for me. That's what works for me. It works for me because I'm a natural food guy from the get-go, from the 70s. And it's what I enjoy. It's what I appreciate. It's what feels good in my body. And so, but I recognize that everybody starts at a different place along the journey, their health journey. And I think we want to meet them where they are and give them the choices. And as information becomes more available and impact becomes more visible, and then I think folks will be able to help supply them. More people are going to add more plant-based things to their diet in the coming years. So that's very clear. They want those choices. They're ready for those choices. They may take them in a different cadence or in a different assortment or in a different way, but directionally it is going to happen. And I think at some point the science behind it will show up in a way that's evidence-based, that's going to show the real connection here for this. But also the taste is going to continue to improve. The companies are out there working on taste of these products as well. And I think what you find below that is that people, the reliance on salt or sugar or some of these other ingredients that have historically been used since World War II are going to fall away as people figure out new ways to appreciate food.
Yeah. Okay. So there's just so much to unpack there. I want to summarize a little bit because it's so good what you've said. I think that we're entering into the time of the empowered consumer, and that consumer no longer just listens to a campaign that says milk does a body good and considers that the end of the day. They have Google at their fingertips. They are empowered, and COVID has made them take control of their own health. With that, I'm always telling my clients there's a lot of equity in being first. So the more you can lean into that communication strategy about being out front and transparent about your products, the more you will have customer loyalty because that consumer is ready and waiting. They are knowledgeable and the supply is not meeting the demand for plant-based. Again, these consumers know what they want. And there's been some bottlenecks with smaller companies being able to produce at scale because let's face it, it's not Brooklyn and San Francisco that needs more vegan stuff. It's everybody in between. So there's not enough supply, and those companies that can breach that bottleneck and also be out there in front communicating with their customers, I think do the best. And then lastly, I'll just say, in the beginning of this conversation, you said this trend is akin to the digital age. And just like you would not invest in a typewriter today, there's nothing that can help the landline. I think that's the way we're going with animal agriculture. In its day, it was innovative, but that innovation has reached the end of its life. There's nothing more you can do with that system, just like there's nothing more you can really do with a typewriter. On the other hand, plant-based, and we'll talk about cellular in a bit, this is, 0.3, it's not even a 1.0 in a way. I mean, there's so much innovation still to be done, so many ways to make it better. And we're living through that right now. So it's a very, very exciting time. And really lots of money to be made therein, which is why I thought grocery stores might react a little quicker to this increased consumer demand. But of course, COVID made it hard for them, even if the demand was there for plant-based.
Well, two things on that, if I may. One is, look, I mean, if you talk to the folks in animal agriculture, they do feel like they're continuing to innovate, whether it's the Savory Institute, whether it's they're working with the land. There are many innovative things happening in animal agriculture. And in my experience, you've got these two that are evolving simultaneously, and the customer will be the one that kind of, moves that all along. As the customer continues to choose more of these sorts of choices, the system will respond. But we certainly want to commend and recognize our friends in those industries that are trying to do right by the land and so forth. But so that's a whole separate conversation. But
if I may just interject there, is that really animal agriculture, or you're just talking about general agriculture, like vertical farming? And there's a lot of innovation therein, but with actual animals and how much you can do with that, do you feel that's still an innovative space?
Well, I don't think it's evolving at quite the same speed this plant-based is, but I think there are practitioners, that are doing incredible things with their land and the way that they're raising the animals and the way they've integrated them into the land and so forth. And the Savory Institute is one organization that's sort of put together some protocols. White Oak Ranch down in Georgia, if you followed him at all, I mean his integration of his respect for the land and his raising the animals as part of that culture of his ranch, which is fifth generation. There's examples of there are examples out there of people who are working to evolve the impact, the footprint, and so forth. But I don't want to get up down a side street here, because I just wanted to make sure we're not looking to put people in the penalty box here. We're looking to grow a dynamic new food economy. And I forgot your point was really around the grocery store, but the fact is the store has just outgrown the four walls. I mean, the fact is it's available. It's so available in all these new channels that didn't even exist 5 years ago. And we're imagining kind of a hybrid future for the grocery store and for the relationship with the customer, which is just fundamentally different than it's been even 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's a very exciting time. And in some ways, as you say, it's this hybrid. So there's more D2C and people are ordering online and not even stopping in the store. They're doing a drive-by. The other side is also true. There's now dine-in restaurants, pre-COVID, I guess, and maybe hopefully post-COVID. Mm-hmm. So grocery stores are taking on a restaurant capability as well. So in one way, they're divesting a little bit, if you will, doing a lot more online. And yet at the other end of the spectrum, they're making that consumer experience that much more rich.
That's right. Exactly right. That's exactly right. All these forms that, the drive-through lanes, the pull-up and curbside pickup, this stuff that just got accelerated by COVID provides customers a lot more options to get their food. And we could add personalization to all that's come out of this too, which is that the technology enables the grocer and the brands to become much more personally connected with their customer. And that's an exciting development for a lifelong retailer to see. I've got a new way to really learn who my customer is and how I can help them and what they particularly want.
Yes, yeah, it is all about that individual and bespoke conversation. Again, going back to the importance of a communication strategy with your clients. Well, we had talked about the developing taste, education, interest of consumers out there recently. Now, you were not the lead on this, but through S2G Ventures, they invested as one of many in Future Meat Technologies, which just raised, slightly under $27 million. And more importantly, they're looking at getting cultivated meat, specifically chicken, to about $7.50 a pound. So coming under $10, this is just a huge innovation and movement towards innovation and bringing cultivated meat to scale. Do you think the consumer is ready or will ever be ready to eat cultivated meat?
It's a great question, and shout out to my friends at S2G and Matt Walker, who's the lead on that investment in Future Meat. I actually do think customers will adopt cell-based meat. I think there's a few companies out there that are pretty far along in terms of having a product ready for market.
Yes.
And I actually do think, I mean, it's a fair question. We don't know for sure because it really hasn't been presented to the market yet. The proposition is there that it's a lighter footprint, it's less resource intensive, essentially is meat. but done in a different way. But I do think that when the customer looks at all those sorts of factors, they're going to see it as a credible alternative. But we don't yet know, because it's not been price competitive up to this point. It's not been produced at a price that's comparable to its lookalike in the market. And second of all, these companies are working now to figure out how they communicate the value proposition to the customer. And I think a lot's going to hinge on their ability to be transparent, their ability to be forthright, proactive about how they're doing what they're doing. No one wants to eat a science experiment. They want to eat food. And so I think that the importance of them being able to develop those the communication that invites people in to realize this is another choice. I think if they successfully navigate that, I think it will be received in the marketplace. But ultimately, the customer will decide that question, and I'm just one customer. But so that's my thought: is it's really going to hinge on their ability to take those final steps in a way that invites people in and makes them feel comfortable with how the food's being produced.
Yes, I have high hopes for this, because it is one of those rare situations in life when you think, I really can have it all. So you get meat, you don't have the environmental footprint or the animal issues, and it doesn't, comes to you much faster and potentially cheaper. Really, when they get the technology down, it should be much cheaper than meat, given to how quickly it can scale, and you're not using land, water, time, et cetera, all the grains. So there's a lot there in that story. Back to communication with the consumer, there's a lot there in that story to share that, maybe you really can have it all and save the planet while you're at it. So there's a lot there that's really good.
Well, think about Whole Foods in our history. I mean, it started in 1978 with John's First Store, but just think about all the years it took for Whole Foods to grow into the position in the market that it occupied. Yes. There was a long period of time where it wasn't that well known, and where it took a while for the sort of idea that the quality of food mattered to get established. And there was it would be, while things have been sped up in this time, and we're used to instantaneous gratification and much rapid cycle than it was even 10 years ago, still there's going to be an adoption curve here that's going to take time. There'll be something that'll come out, it'll improve, there'll be a cycle that happens, and I think if people expect it to come out like a rocket ship going to Mars, I don't think it's going to happen that way. But I think there's going to be an adoption curve of how this thing comes out and people taste it and gets around. It may be and remember, that's exactly what happened in Whole Foods. It took 30 years to build the company out to the place where people know it as they know it. And so I think there'll be some sort of reasonable time period for these things to show up in part of the constellation of the new food world order is going to be. But cell-based meat will probably be part of it.
Yes, I think it will. And precision fermentation, a lot of products are coming out sort of along the same lines of cultivated meat, although not as technically difficult, let's say. So for those who may not know, I'm oversimplifying, but if you take a little swab inside of a cow's mouth, let's say, or you take a piece of hair, or you just go to a database that already has the gene profile therein, you can take the protein gene from the animal and you can, for lack of a better expression, map it onto something like a fungi, give that fungi its sugars and other foods, and you will have milk proteins or animal proteins that grow. And then you add fat and sugar, you've got ice cream, or, you do whatever you do to make it whatever product you want. So that technology is already here. It's in a lot of our pharmaceuticals. It's how we do insulin and other things. So, and that's kind of to me, an example that technology in our food is not new and it's not necessarily bad. So that's why I really want people to get ahead of that conversation with the consumer and not have it go the way of GMO, because there already has been a lot of technology in our food and we've accepted it and it's worked out well. And there are lots of benefits to that if we're transparent and, we really see what's behind the curtain. So I think precision fermentation could get to market way before even cellular meat.
Well, I think you have a big role to play in that with this show and with the people that you talk to. I think that's exactly right. There's got to be an understanding that it's food first, technology second, but yes. It's not about the technology. It's about technology that allows us to produce food. And I think your role is to kind of help spread the word, open up, and have that dialogue, and have folks that are willing to be, okay, how are you doing this, and how are you using the SynBio process, or how are you using the precision manufacturing process? we need to start talking about those things so people understand it's not going on behind in some dark room with people where there's not light shining. We've got to shine the light on it and talk about it and say why it makes sense to do and what's the purpose of it and how does it sit along, those sorts of conversations need to happen now.
Yes,
And
I agree. Ahead of time.
and there's going to be a working out process in this in the marketplaces, people. But clearly they've said, if with Impossible Burger and beyond, if you bring something new, somebody's going to buy it. They're going to try it because they're looking for these sorts of choices.
Yes, we're back to the consumer demand is really much higher than the supply. The consumer is empowered and they're looking for these choices. And it's up to us to meet those demands and communicate as such. And I also think, I don't know if grocery stores will ever get to the point in time when they have their private label cellular meat, but when grocery stores started producing their own private label of plant-based almond yogurt, and Whole Foods does my favorite yogurt, they've got some great cheeses, and Ralph's and Kroger's, they've also done the same. That really, I thought, nailed it for consumers. Like, oh, this is pretty mainstream. I wonder if you have any comment about private label in the plant-based and cellular space for grocery stores.
Well, you figure private label on balance represents about 20% of a grocery store sales. I think what it is, it demonstrates it's not going to go to private label unless it's actually established enough volume to warrant that sort of placement. So it's definitely a sign of that the adoption of, for example, non-dairy milks is huge, and the growth is monstrous. And so the fact that it shows up in private label tells you it's arrived. And it continues to grow. It tells you that, right? So, that's probably, different grocery stores have different percentages of private label depending on their format. But the fact is, these products are widely distributed as private label across all stores. Tells you that we've arrived at. We're not in the first inning now. We're at least at the third inning. I don't know what inning we're in exactly, but we're into the game here in terms of this adoption.
I love that. So plant-based milks are 14 to 15% of the entire milk market, and 41% of households have plant-based milk in them. So we're looking at 41% household penetration. So yes, plant-based milks have arrived, and really everybody's using that, or many are using that as the standard for what plant-based meat could be in households. So a very interesting time. I wonder if you have any suggestions for young entrepreneurs, because you do so much advising through Stonewall Robb Advisors and also S2G Ventures. If you have any tips for the young business, the poor business that launched during COVID, oh gosh, tips for them to get distribution, because as you say, now it's not just the grocery store, it's also that brand going direct to consumer.
Well, it's a great question. And, we are seeing the new generation of entrepreneurs that are creating the next generation of products. It's pretty exciting for an old guy like me to see that happening. It's really enlivening and exciting, because I remember back when, et cetera, et cetera. But one, they got to have a great product. You've got to have you've got to create something that's truly disruptive, truly different, truly got amazing properties to it. It's got to be a great product. So concentrate on producing something that truly will bring value to the customer, or some deliciousness or some aspect that is truly contributory to a new choice. Second of all, I think be ready to do all channels. In other words, you've got to be ready to the way that you bring a product to market today. You've got to be D2C. You've got to be working on the digital platforms. You've got to use social media to your advantage in terms of getting the word out about your product and communicate with your customers. That's certainly expected, and as well as maintain and build your relationships with the retailers and all the channels that they offer. So from the get-go, imagining how you go to market in a different way than, again, we would have done 10 years ago, using all these new platforms and tools that are available to you. Third, I think, what I get this question a lot from people is how do you build a culture too as you're going along? In other words, how do you not lose your soul? So this idea of making sure that you understand your purpose. Why did you go in business? What are you here to do? Second of all, kind of what are your values that guide that? And third, how will you continue to keep that as your North Star as you grow your company, so that you stand for something with your product and with your company? Increasingly, customers expect you as a company to do that, to contribute in some way, to be part of the community, be the part of the world in some way. So I know usually I spend time helping them to clarify those sorts of foundational or fundamental things to get those kind of aligned. And then I think, it's what they're doing is coming up with something that's truly novel or different, and then you just try to help them, guide them, or support them in the bringing of those to the market.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's the time of the empowered consumer, and it's the time of the empowered entrepreneur, because yes, it's more work. No one said it would be easy, but you have every tool now at your disposal. You don't have to wait for one grocery store chain to pick you up. You really, through social media and also direct to consumer, this is your time to, if you have the wherewithal, get out there and shine. So it's a very exciting time. And I think, from the plant-based standpoint, you're just seeing more and more brands hit the market. For flexitarians, they might think it's only Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods, but there are so many more brands than that, and they're hitting the market in full force. And if grocery stores aren't ready to pick them up yet, as you say, we're still in a COVID world, and grocery stores have leaned a little bit towards staying conservative and keeping what people have always bought in the past, rather than picking up new brands. But those entrepreneurs can go direct to consumer, and so that's very exciting.
Well, let me just say, in support
Please.
of in front of my grocery brothers and sisters, look, it's really hard to run a store in these times, and some of it is they've just had to reduce the selection in order to be able to stay in stock and keep systems running. There's a lot of backup in the pipeline, and it's a tough business to be in, and some trade-offs had to be made. So I understand why folks had to make some adjustments during this time of COVID, but be assured that what is coming in terms of selection of plant-based foods is unbelievable. What people are working on and what's coming, and the amount of brands and the amount of startups and the amount of choices that are coming. And as we restore, as we see a post-COVID, get to a post whenever that is, and it doesn't look like it's tomorrow, these choices, the pipe will open back up. These choices will continue to come, and in more ways than ever before. And if you could just see what I'm seeing now in terms of the types of choices that are emerging, it's unbelievable what people are thinking about and exploring. And, we're also talking about the diversity of plants. We are tapping less than 1% of the diversity of the plant world in our product lines today. And there are companies now working to unlock that richness and diversity that's out there. Imagine the kind of plethora of choices that are going to be available that, because I think I use this number, I can't remember exactly right, but sort of 75% of our choices come from 12 plants and 5 animals, or some number like that, which just, the point is that there's so much untapped potential out there to produce a new generation of choices, and to reappreciate the whole foods that are going to take new forms. Lentils happen to be one of my favorites, right? So they're kind of underappreciated, but they're a powerhouse. And barley and these crops, when you look at how the pulse crops, how you farm them, you are farming in a very responsible way, because you must rotate them to farm them. And so, there'll be a new appreciation for lentils when people realize just how responsible they are and how delicious they are. But so we have so many choices coming, or as customers have so many choices coming in the plant-based world. It's going to be really exciting to watch it unfold.
So much to unpack there. What I'm going to have to do is have you back on another show to talk about farming, because right now we're talking about plant-based products, but the changes that are going to happen in the farming system are blowing my mind. And as we look to rotate crops, as you say, and therefore bring in crops that we usually never think of, like barley, I can't wait for barley to come into its own. It is such an exciting time. And as you say, things like lentils, most people don't even think about lentils. One of my very favorites, because they are so packed with taste. So you're going to see. It's funny when people say to me, because I am vegan, and people say to me, gosh, well, what do you eat? And I think, oh, my world was so small when I was on meat and dairy, because I was eating the same 5 things again and again, a ham and cheese sandwich. And then I opened up to vegetables, most of which I had forgotten about. And I was like, oh my gosh, sweet potatoes and eggplants. I just felt like my world got so much bigger. And I think for a lot of people, they're going to feel that their choices are going to become so much bigger. If I may.
Well said.
If I may, I want to share with you a quote from the founder of Tofurky, Seth Tibbett. You probably know him. And he always says, the superpower of plant-based foods is that they are so mission-driven. So when you talk about the entrepreneur that really has to know their mission and their North Star, and they can't lose sight of that, it's one of the things that plant-based brands have in their back pocket, because they still want to see this change come forward in the world. So as I work with my clients at Plant Powered Consulting, I always feel lucky, because while the brand deck that we put together takes lots of work, the mission is always right there. It's so clear for so many people. So it's beautiful to work in that realm.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And you might share this, during COVID, so much of the world had bad news every day. And then if you followed politics, maybe you felt that regardless of what side you were on, maybe you felt that as well. But then I was working in the plant-based space. So I was like, every day I get great news. I get joyful news every day. So we are lucky to work in the space that we work. I have a few exit questions for you. So let me ask you. You have, as we said before, been in this arena for decades, and you have seen trends come and go, and that this you expect to be, like the digital trend, a powerhouse that's here to stay. Beyond the world going plant-based, let's say in the next 3 to 5 years, what are you predicting are going to be the major changes?
Well, in stores or in food or in both?
I will let it be to you.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think at the curbside pickup and delivery are table stakes. Those will just be part of the repertoire of how customers shop. I think that we've already talked about the emergence of plant-based alternatives as being part of the marketplace. That's certainly a huge trend. I think we talked about how brands and companies will behave and how they'll communicate more proactively about their practices and where they stand on a number of different transparency and accountability. From the grocery store world that I know the best, you're going to see maybe less stores, or the growth will be not be as rapid in terms of physical stores, but the growth will be massive with respect to the digital and those sorts of options. And you'll see experimentation with all sorts of ways to do that growth, whether it's through warehouses, or whether it's through dark stores, or whether it's through micro fulfillment centers. Grocers are going to continue to tinker with how they can serve their customer and serve them better. So you'll see the emergence of all sorts of personalization engines out there that allow the customer to kind of really dial in on their own particular food choices and work in partnership with the retailer to do that. You're going to see just this whole new magical world of shopping emerge. And somewhere in all there is, we're going to rediscover flavor. We're going to rediscover taste. We're going to diversify seed sources, beyond just the kind of very narrow, there's just a lot. I mean, we could talk at any end of the value chain. There's going to be massive change as we create this new, more sustainable food system. So we'd have to unpack that in another time where we look at all those different areas. But I just think it's an exciting time to see if the first generation of food since World War II, which is really when the modern food system was born, up to the present time, we are now undertaking a generational shift into a new era of food that's going to be, have a lot of things we talked about today.
Yes, so very exciting. I couldn't agree more. And I just think it's going to happen at a rate that we've never really seen before.
It is happening at a rate. Yeah.
Yes. So incredibly exciting. Well, sort of riffing off of that, this question is twofold. When you look back on all your years with Whole Foods, what is the one lesson that really sticks with you? And the second part to that question, similar but different, what do you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now? You can make that 5 if you want to, too.
Thank you. Well, I was so blessed to be part of the team that was that we did build Whole Foods, and I think that the greatest lesson learned for me really is as a leader is as the organization grew from a small organization to a very, very large organization was really around my leadership and around the role a leader plays, and realizing that your job is to create a place for the empowerment of others and to be able to create a space where people can step into their own abilities, and that's what helps a company to grow. So it's the lessons really more on the humbling side of being what it means to be a leader and how to lead effectively by really creating space for other people and to let them own the purpose of the company and give it their own expression in a way that's very powerful and helps the company to grow. So that's the greatest learning for me as a leader and as a person, because I'm type A, hard driving but that's kind of what I learned there. And what was your second question? I'm sorry.
What do you wish you knew 10 years ago or 5 that you know now?
Yeah. Gosh, I come back to the same answer. I guess I wish that I had realize it's not, when it's all about the people. It's all about the people. Business is really all about the people. I can walk a store in my sleep, a grocery store, and see everything that's going on. As soon as I walk across the transom, I can feel the energy. I can feel every aspect of the store. But what's most important is the people that are in the store and how that's working. So I wish I had known that in proportion as when I was younger, in the way that I know it now. But I know it now. I know it for sure. I know it to be true.
Oh, isn't that great? You know it for sure. Well, we talked about all the things that are going to be emerging in the plant-based space, and one of the things we touched on is it might actually be the heyday or prime moment of whole food plant-based. So as people have this plethora of choices, one of the choices they're going to have is whole food plant-based, and I think we will see that as a trend that gets lots of momentum. Because you are whole food plant-based, I want to ask you, you're on the run, you didn't have time for lunch, you're running around like a crazy person. What is your go-to snack?
Yeah, my favorite thing in the whole world is apricots, but so apricots or dried apricots. So often it's that a piece of fruit. I have to admit I do like chocolate, so that is true. And berries. So I usually typically grab some fruit, some berries, chocolate. I know that's an honest answer.
Chocolate is my vitamin of choice. That's
that's one way to think about it. But
it's a vitamin I need every day. Come on now.
Yeah, typically I just don't stop. I just forget to eat and then maybe have dinner a little bit earlier. But that's my best answer, I think. Yeah, I'm trying to remember if there's anything else, but yeah,
I love it.
Not very inspiring.
So my very last question here is, if you're having a day that isn't going your way, and obviously COVID threw a wrench for a lot of people on a lot of days, is there one phrase that you say to yourself to get yourself back in the game?
Well, my word for this year in 2021 is joy, and the desire to remember, to seek for that and search for that and work for that and work towards that end. So. Albert Schweitzer said that the purpose, that the humanity requires that each and every one of us show up in every minute to help lift one another up. And I think, part of the joy is being able to remember about each other and helping each other out. So, yeah, you can get caught up in your own stuff and you can go in a downward spiral. So get up out the chair, go take a walk, take a deep breath, and think about the more positive picture of what we're trying to build here, which is that as we get through the COVID together, get out the other side, we're going to be able to step more deeply into our relationships with one another, whether it be a supplier, whether it be producer, whether it be, whoever it is and be able to create that more human world that I think we all crave and are missing so much right now. So that's typically, I just get up out the chair and try to kick myself in the butt and say, all right, what are you doing to contribute towards that? Is there somebody you can write a note to or make a phone call or think about something in a way that would help to move towards that end? And also to remember, you're striving for some joy. You're not just soldiering on every day. You're trying to do some work that's going to create more joy in my life and in the life of others.
Mm-hmm. I love that you say that. We end today's interview on joy and the joy we are creating together and the joy that we can create through innovation, new products, possibilities for people, giving them choice and just saving the world from itself. So I want to thank you, Walter Robb, for being with me here today, for all that you do, your long time meaningful work that has laid the foundation really for the work that we're trying to do today. So I want to thank you for that. I hope that you will join me again, because I really would like to talk about sustainable farming. And so maybe that's another conversation for another day.
It would be my pleasure. And thank you for doing your show in such an enthusiastic, passionate, and informed way. It's a wonderful experience. So thank you.
I'm so happy you say that. Thank you. You'll be coming back. Everybody on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, I'm saying goodbye to you. Walter, don't go anywhere. Everybody else, goodbye. And I will see you on Thursday.